Good evening. That's better. Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Deans, HODs here today, family and friends of Mr. David Fryer, Mr. Fryer's father, Mr. Blaise Fryer, and daughter, Miss Emily Fryer, who are joining us virtually to celebrate with him. Special guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to this Vice Chancellor's Senior Distinguished Teaching Award lecture for 2020. Chancellor's Senior Distinguished Teaching Award is presented annually to an academic with 10 or more years of experience who has demonstrated to a panel of peers that their work as an academic teacher is truly exceptional. The award is meant to recognize and celebrate excellence, innovation, and dedication in and to teaching. The 2020 Senior Distinguished Teaching Award was presented to Mr. Fryer of the Department of Economics and Economic History during the university's annual graduation ceremony held in April this year. Mr. Fryer was born and grew up in Zimbabwe. He went to university in Pietermaritzburg, where he obtained a Master of Science in Economics from the University of Natal. He started working as a tutor in his alma mater at the Pietermaritzburg campus, where he spent 2 years teaching micro and macroeconomics at second year level. Mr. Fryer came to Rhodes University in 1995 as a Hobart Houghton Research Fellow in the Department of Economics and Economic History. In 1997, he became a full-time lecturer in the same department and later a senior lecturer in economics. In all, Mr. Fryer has been teaching economics for a quarter of a century. He argues that during this time, he witnessed dramatic changes in society, and these are reflected on campus and in the classroom. Teaching in a transforming environment and doing so in a way that is proactive and caring has been his main passion during these years. In addition to his teaching, Mr. Fryer is a member of the Neil Agathe Labor Studies Unit, and from 2015 to 2019, he was involved in service learning offered to trade union and social movement activists in conjunction with the unit, in which he taught a short course on political economy and economic and social policy. He has supervised or co-supervised several master's theses and over 50 honors research projects. His research interests are linked to the central question of teaching and transformation, namely the maximization of human potential and the development of equitable and sustainable societies. He's currently engaged in research projects on contribution of local agency to sustainability, early learning, Rhodes University 9/10 program, and the performance of economics year 2 students. His students describe him as a brilliant, passionate lecturer with an outstanding experience and work ethic. They believe that the passion he carries for economics is so easily transferred onto students and serves as a great motivator for them to do well academically. It is in his mannerisms and the passion he carries for economics which motivate students. It is his mannerisms and the passion he carries for economics which motivate students. Mr. Fryer admits that he has been confronted with a variety of teaching and learning challenges, particularly diversity in student learning and holding the interest of students enrolled in economics, which he says can be daunting at times. However, he views these challenges as falling within the broader academic project, where academics are called to induct students into particular disciplinary literacies, thus equipping them with cross-cutting discourses and values such as criticality, reflexivity, collegiality, professionalism, as well as citizenship. While he regards transformation of the curriculum as important, his central tenet in the transformation of the relation is the transformation of the transformation between the lecturer, pardon me, like the teacher and the learner. To him, transformation of the teacher and the learning process is as critical as transforming what is taught, the curriculum. He believes that transformation of the teacher requires explicit engagement with the concept of the teacher as the leader who must guide and facilitate learning. His stance on student learning is based on the premise that his students are very good material, morally and intellectually. He does not subscribe to the notion of blaming poor performance on students or falling standards. He attributes poor student performance largely to poor teaching and curriculum. Today, we are acknowledging someone who has been and continues to be exemplary to our students. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to invite Mr. David Fryer to present his distinguished teaching award lecture titled Teaching Learning, Contextualizing Economics in a Transforming Society, Unlocking Potential at the undergraduate level. Over to you.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you to the Vice Chancellor, in whose name this award is, and I think, let me share my esteem for your itself. The Deputy Vice Chancellors, Professor Clayton and Professor Wanapulu Mapasela, thank you for that lovely, those words. They're very touching. And I think some of that is aspiration. So if some of the students are here thinking, but I presume they're not here, those ones. Okay. Thank you very much. The deans, particularly Professor Suri, for all your support. Heads of departments, my colleagues in the Commerce faculty and more in the university, and in particular in the economics department, and most particularly my current head of department, the very energetic and brilliant Professor Snowball. I had to do that. And my former heads, I'm not sure if they're here, Professor Antrobus, Professor Nell sends his apologies, and the former dean, Professor Webb, if he's here. The students, if they're here, postgraduates, undergraduates that were invited because you were good at doing well in my course. Huh? Yeah. And class reps, thank you. And the excellent Mr. Zolani Shobo, if he's here. If he's not, let's remember him. He's the admin secretary, whatever we call it, the guy who's always there if you need him in our department. Churtle and EdTech, thank you for all of your support. Really appreciate it. I don't think we would have got through the last couple of years without your support. And generally the support at Rhodes is great. Finally, my family, my father, who I hope can hear us, who's in Ireland. He's 90, but he's still probably the smartest or the second smartest, or the third smartest person. Well, he's up there, right? He's smart. He's really got an encyclopedia. I talk to him almost every night, and I'm looking at Google Maps, and he's just remembering, and I'm looking up place names or dates, and he just knows everything. Absolutely wonderful man, very generous as well. To my wife, Nikki, who is, as you'll know, she's a brilliant academic, but she's also a kind, loyal, and resilient person. The younger generation, Claire and Emily, who hopefully can also hear online, they're becoming wonderful, somewhat academic. We're not quite sure yet. And finally, my mum died earlier this year, and my dad is quite upset that she couldn't see me, and my sister passed a couple of years, and they both were always very supportive of me, even when I didn't deserve the support, quite a lot of the time. And if I've missed anyone, I apologize. Thank you very much. Okay, I struggle with having a microphone because I'm like an Italian. I really need to, yeah. Okay, so I just thought that poem kind of captures where we are. If you look at the last line, if I had been two, so you can imagine if you had a teaching assistant or just someone to help you. And I think this idea of not always being short of time and resources, right? And that lovely line about the reach should exceed the grasp. And I think we always feel like that, especially in South Africa. Our grasp is weak, but that doesn't undermine our idealism, right? We still feel that we are going somewhere. Okay, right, so introduction. What we do a lot in these lectures is celebration, and celebration is very important, and we see academically, it's interesting in community engagement that they talk about appreciative inquiry, right? And asset-based community development, where you're trying to build on strengths. It's very important that we do that. And these lectures do that. But we also need to reflect on the other side of the academic project, right? The dark side of the moon, right? Not so much that, but particularly when we look at undergraduates, we see pass rates, that there's always a struggle. If we maintain standards, then the pass rate's going to drop through the floor. And the broader project of upward mobility that we really are part of. We're often the only bridge from poor background into the middle and class and elites. So we always feel very, students are under terrible pressure because if they fail, they're back into the township or the village, right? And also limits to the transformation of the structures into which our students are moving. The university itself limits. I think the university has transformed tremendously, but we always, it's a job that's never completed. And particularly into our society. And we need to remind ourselves that most of our students, many are not going to be the elites. Most of our economics graduates are not going to be economists. They're going to be something else. They're going to get their undergraduate degree and become middle classes. And the middle classes are critical for the future of the country. Okay, so limits to that. And I feel that I've slightly falsely advertised this talk because I don't talk a lot about that in my talk, but it's never got around to it, right? Normally when you're a lecturer, you have 4 or 5 years doing the same material. So it's a bit of a shock to the system when you have to produce a lecture, you know, like, and of course you spend 98% of your time thinking about it, and then 1% on PowerPoint, another 1% panicking, right? Okay, so the main argument there, right, and I'm not really going to hammer this tonight, is that huge potential remains untapped at the undergraduate level, right? And we can see this if we look at the reverse of the threat of rising failure rates, you know, just that, but also the threat of not producing a middle class in South Africa. If our students are not learning anything worthwhile at university, if they're only coming in to get a piece of paper so they can make money, they're not becoming critical citizens, right? Okay. And so what I'm going to do, and also that I think there's a limit to what we can do without a system shift. So what I'm going to do, talk about economics, and I wanted to do that. That's mine, if you like, right? Teaching economics, learning economics, right? Because they're not the same. You know, we often think you're going to just present economics to students and that's the end. It has to be taught, and then even when it's taught, it doesn't go in. So you have to actively engage with how students are learning. And how do we develop further scaffolding and support to achieve those two ends, right? Pass rates without lowering standards, but also thinking about what standards are and what we want to achieve, right? Okay, so as I said, the limits and the possibilities at the end might be a bit of a stretch. Okay, economics, right? Let's be more precise, neoclassical economics. And it's a lovely one. People on the left hate it. People will be surprised. I'm on the left, aren't I? You will think, no, I'm not. I'm in the middle. I'm right. No. Okay, well, I think basically when we think about economics, we think about demand and supply. And for example, unemployment, right? And we think of supply and demand, and it seems obvious that. So we love this phrase. It seems obvious that. It seems obvious, if you look at the diagram, demand and supply, well, demand is less than supply. So it must be that wages are too high, right? So it must be that something is stopping wages from falling. What is it? Minimum wages and unions. So we can safely blame the poor for the problem of unemployment. Okay? So that's a kind of neoclassical, simple explanation, right? But let's look at supply and demand in a different way here, and more in terms of the academy. In terms of the university, where does it sit? So demand obviously has to do ultimately with what people need, but what we need is not that much, ultimately. So it's what we desire, and then it's also what is good, what we ought to have, what we ought to aspire to in society. Okay, and supply is about possibility, but also limits, and therefore in economics it's costs, right? So we've got prices people are willing to pay for things and the cost of things on that side. So when we look at demand, it's the preserve, that end of the spectrum is the preserve of philosophy, obviously. Trying to understand what's good in society. Obviously, I don't know if anatomy is the right word. People who study what people need physically, right? Psychology, and then at a higher level, literature and art. And Keynes always said, that economists are inferior to, we provide means for the higher things. So we're inferior, but inferior in the way that a foundation is inferior to a building. And then, of course, the scientists are even inferior to us. That's it, right? Because, okay, like psychology, now we ask ourselves, why do people love mountains? right? Why do they love mountains? They're in the way, right? They cause bad weather, they kill people. Why do we love mountains? Well, actually, economists don't ask that question, do they? Not interested in that at all. Right? We're interested in this sort of stuff, economists, right? The natural sciences about supply. I don't know if I'm leaving anyone out here, but what is the applied sciences, logistical sciences? I don't even know where maths fits in here. Eh? What is it? A language. But what I'm going to say, lovely, economics is right in the middle, isn't it? It's seeing everything. It's right in the middle of the academy between demand and supply. So we position ourselves as, that's what we aspire to, right? Our reach. But then the scientists are trying to increase our grasp. Eh? And economists we have a panopticon view of the whole thing. So we amateur economists, right? We amateur, business people. Of course, business is down there somewhere. But it's also up there trying to influence people to buy stuff. Eh? So it doesn't work. That's what we always do when we have theoretical kind of categories. They're lovely up to a point. Eh? But anyway, let's go up to a point. So Gary Becker, who's also very unpopular on the left, right? The arch neoclassical economist, he didn't say it himself, but the idea was a kind of theory of everything. What I like, that's what I think I liked about micro, right? It's kind of like starts from first principles, and then it can explain everything, right? Lovely, eh? Quite problematic, perhaps, eh? Especially neoclassical economics and consumer sovereignty, right? That's how society works. People want stuff and businesses supply it, right? And scientists find out how to make more of it, right? And make it better. So all that society wants is make good for people. Okay, that's obviously very problematic. Eh? Economics got ahead of itself in the 70s, and people started to complain. Economics imperialism, right? It's colonizing sociology, politics, even biology, right? Because it turns out that animals act quite economically, right? They respond to incentives, right? They dig holes like we do. So there are lots of blind spots, right? And yes, it's very ideologically biased because we now are starting to see the economic system, markets, as good, unproblematically supplying what people want. And how things ought to be, how does that work? Who decides that? Well, the market. Okay? If something's expensive, then it's not good. Okay. So yes, it is, but it's also wonderfully, if that's even a word, subvertible. So neoclassical economics it's very ideological. Your model is that markets are perfect, right? That's an assumption. It's not a conclusion. It's like let's like when you're talking about physics, let's pretend atoms are like billiard balls, right? We don't really think they are, but it's quite handy to start there. Okay, so it's wonderfully subvertible and teachable. Okay, it's also important because it pushes into the forward liberalism, which I think is very important. Okay? The idea of social liberalism, freedom. Okay, right. So now moving on to teaching second-year economics, right, particularly, and never mind that, we'll come back to that. Generally, we do present ourselves as a science, economics, right? And the kind of hint there is that economics has no value at all, except what it says about the real world, the economy. Eh? So the purpose of economists is to explain the economy. It's not like art, where it's intrinsically valuable. Economics has no intrinsic value whatsoever. Although you might enjoy reading that book, most don't. It's only worthwhile if it has utility. Okay, so it presents itself as a science. And as you know, with science, the primacy must always be with empiricism, observing, right? Observable fact. you observe and then you explain. That's the direction of movement. So in terms, as Quine put it, we're moving toward a more thorough pragmatism. So we start with pragmatism, what's observable, what is, right? Objective reality. We try to explain it well. And then we move to more encompassing theories, which are able to consistently explain more than one thing at a time. You don't have a million theories, you're moving towards one theory, ideally. You've got one universe, you should have one theory. Well, economists think that anyway, it should be economics, right? Okay, so it seems obvious, but lots of things seem obvious, like that first example I told you, right? Like it seems obvious that, for example, the earth is flat, right? The poor are lazy. That South Africa can't afford to invest ever, and we must just not invest and get more and more into a hole. And it's obvious that Trump won the election, right? To some people. So when things seem obvious, they're often dangerous, right? Now in science, of course, you're very strong on experimental method, critique, but in the broader sphere of public discourse, and economics is often, says it's a science, but it's quite a sloppy science a lot of the time. It's not that clear cut. Most of our experiments are not controlled. Mostly we just doing stuff that's pretty not scientific at all. Okay, so in fact, what we do in economics, what we do is we change the primacy to the overall picture, logic. So we start off with logic and we get rid of reality, and that's gone behind the picture there, right? And we put a little eventually. We're going to describe reality eventually, right? Not immediately. And I think it's fine, right? We do maths and we do science, and we can start with models that are unrealistic. I think that's very valid, okay? Now, so what we've done here is we've taken Quine's little dictum and we've inverted it. Let's see if it will invert. Okay, when it wants to invert it. So instead of having a more thorough pragmatism, we're trying to have a more pragmatic thoroughness. So this is exactly what we do in economics. We start off with thoroughness. We start off with a model world, right? A grand theory. We don't start off with little theories. We might think we do, but we don't. Those little theories we think we're teaching are embedded in a grand theory. Otherwise, they would be nonsense, right? Assuming people are fully rational, right? People are independent. They're not influenced by anything other than their own mind, and markets are perfect. Okay, so we prioritize the worldview, or if you like, the model ontology, right? It's a contradiction in terms, but it's what is real in our model, even though it's not real at all, right? So we prioritize the story over the reality. And stage one in the program is structured by the core assumptions. And how many core assumptions are there in economics? The students say there are 2. So you're literally building a whole model world based on 2 core assumptions. The one core assumption has to be to do with what people are like. People are rational and independent. Okay, that's 2 assumptions. Okay, and the other one is about structure. The structural assumption is that people can go and get what they like at markets. There are no impediments to choice. The only impediment is your income. Markets are perfect. You can just now, if you're feeling thirsty, you could immediately get a Coke. The fact that you're stuck in a lecture, that market failure is assumed away. Okay, obviously more important market failures like unemployment are also assumed away. Right, so then what we do is we add some very simplifying assumptions like that there are only 2 people in the world, there are only 2 goods, that all that people care about is something called utility. Right? So whether you are getting your mother's love or you're eating sausages, you get the same thing from it, right? And we can count it and it's 10 utils or 8. It's funny for economists, most people are astounded and bemused. Okay, but then what we do is we apply it and we extend it to general equilibrium. So a worldview, general equilibrium modeling. And then stage 2 is we critique it. Okay. So we build our model and then we critique it. And critique has two stages, right? We carefully note down anomalies when we go in. So when we're saying we're building a funny model and the students are saying this, you say, yes, good, well done, right? Let's note that down. We'll come back to that. We can even see where it violates the core assumption. People are, they're writing an essay on addiction. Well, it's not, people are dependent. They're not independent. They become dependent, right? People are under pressure because the market doesn't give them opportunities, okay? So we note anomalies and then eventually we revisit the core, but by that time the course is over. Right, you've run out of time, so we leave students not, okay, it's a problem, but, right, so that's basically what we teach students, right, in second year micro. Now, again, there's a great danger here to teaching what seems like an unrealistic model. And the danger is unrealism, and economists are guilty of creating many theories, right, which are often unnecessary and which are torturing second year students, right? Like income and substitution effects and things like that. And of course, it's ideologically biased. If you have models that assume markets are perfect, what kind of conclusions are those models going to have? They're going to conclude that markets are perfect, right? Although actually when we do general equilibrium, even if you assume markets are perfect, you can't prove markets are imperfect. The models become incoherent. But interest as well, interest groups, right? Love liberal economics, that business doesn't need regulation, right? But there's a danger here, but let's just say I don't think it's dangerous at all. I think it's dangerous not to teach economics like this. Right? Firstly, when we are noting anomalies, right, we don't do that at stage 2A. We do it from the beginning. So we immediately say, when we assume a consumer likes only 2 goods, everyone says, but hang on. And you say, yes. But let's be careful here. We're looking at a consumer who only likes 2 goods. We're not looking at this consumer likes 10 goods and we're looking at 2 of them. Looking at a cartoon world to get thoroughness, look at their whole consumption decision. Then when we extend our model, we're going to have more goods and we'll still be thorough. Okay? And also, what's very important here is I think the real danger doesn't come from, I don't think the real danger comes from grand system thinking. The real danger doesn't come from religious thinking at all, because the people skip certain parts of the text that they don't like, right? So the real danger comes from narrowness and lack of awareness of your assumptions, right? Your lack of awareness that what you're doing is unreal. You're doing it for the purpose of harvesting concepts. So you're looking at billiard balls so you can see things in isolation. You're not getting confused by detail. So you can build progressively, right? The danger of indiscipline and mere pragmatism, thinking something seems to be obvious, and then taking it. And often what happens is by the time you get to 40, that has now become ingrained in your mind. Yeah, so we get dogmatic because we think we know. Okay, so the lovely thing about this, and what we do, let me just, we know that the book of life is always open halfway through, right? But what we do in economics is we always say, no, let's go back to first principles, even if they, look, in reality, first principles. And in practice, I'm not going to always ask you to develop your answer from first principles, but you need to know it. You need to know where you're coming from as an economist. Okay. So other approaches like macroeconomics, institutional economics, Marxism, doesn't matter. Right? Marxism isn't, here what we've done is we've taken all falsehood, everything that doesn't fit the model and externalized it, right? By assumption. People are rational. all irrationality is now outside our immediate concern. Right? Markets are perfect. We've externalized it. Whereas Marxism would start from the opposite, right? We don't, not sundering truth from falsehood, but looking at what the whole world riddled with error, as Benjamin says, right? So, and it doesn't matter where you start. If you take Louis Althusser, he probably wouldn't have been a neoclassical economist, and you read what he says about methodology, he says, the real problem is getting used to you can't be a good academic until you understand the process of abstraction. Looking at something complex and seeing it seems to be the case, but then saying underlying it, there are tendencies which we don't see on the surface, but understanding those give us a powerful insight into how it works. Right. And I think the gap is very nice in economics, right? Between the unrealism, or what seems to be the unrealism of the model world, and then what seems to be pragmatic. So it's lots of things, but actually it's often what you thought was obvious. When you analyze it, it turns out to be not right. You thought something was caused by one thing, like differences between countries is cultural. People are different, right? People like different kinds of music because they're different. No, there are very good reasons why people became different or have different tastes, which we can explain in economics. Okay, so now examples, just quickly. This is a test example. So what we would do, notice what we do though, I'll take you through it quickly. This is female labor force participation. First, ask students to explain it fully within the neoclassical approach. Fully choice theoretic. Wages have gone up, right? The opportunity cost of women's time has increased, therefore they spend less time in household production, they work and they buy things on the market. So we can explain things like decreasing fertility, increasing demand for all sorts of convenience goods, right? Female labor force participation within a fully choice theoretic framework. But then what we do is we go to the next layer and we say, how do we incorporate non-choice factors? Like the fact that women would face unemployment, so they can't choose to work. Or they face dilemmas that they don't know, they have nowhere to put their kids. The choice is between starving or neglecting your kids. Okay? That's not a choice. And then we ask about policy, right? So the policy implication be if we look at this now. Okay, so that's how we would approach it. So you see, we're not starting at the beginning there, but the students need to know where that neoclassical analysis is located, then they can critique it. Okay. Right, another one, the trade unions one, you see the way that we did in the beginning with unemployment. Another exam question. And same thing, right? Give us the orthodox neoclassical story, give us a critique. And then there's a lovely one here, which is in a writing exercise where they must try and reflect on, where you came from. There's unemployment where you came from and poverty. How do the theories resonate or not, right? Okay, so that sounds fantastic, But here's the rub. Look at that. That test, multiple choice, they managed to get an average of 69%. In the written answers, they get 35%. And actually, only 26% passed the written answer, that kind of question. So the message I gave them was that, this material was covered in tights, in the writing exercise, and the test preparation. So please try and self-assess. What was the reason for the bad mark? Did you do the work? Did you not understand, or were you not able to express yourself? Right? But then, unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, when I assessed this, only 40% of students responded that they're well or very well to the question about having reviewed their test. Actually, it was worse. I did say, and are confident that you could answer similar questions in the exam. Hint, 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 right? No, right? And have you understood lessons that I've given you about writing? How do you structure an argument? More than half of them, no, I haven't. And yet nobody's asking me questions, right? And the tutors are saying, the students are sitting there. So the lovely story of teaching something wonderful and then hits this wall, right? And this is, look, lots of the students are doing well, but there's a problem here. Okay. Here's a lovely one, writing example. They're handing in their essay. They have an opportunity. The assignment gives them multiple choice questions and questions about whether they've read the guide. They click on the thing and it takes them to the next layer, right? And then at the end of it, they're allowed to write 2 paragraphs, which their tutors will mark. Guess what the average answer is? Response, NA. Yeah. So they participate in the exercise because they get a mark for participating. Okay. Which is hopefully, yeah. So that's the interesting thing. So now we're moving on to learning economics, right? From the perspective of the student, so to speak. So what the average untrained lecturer, and as a lecturer, you're not really trained, right? You do get some, but kind of learn by doing. So you tend to spend a lot of time on the curriculum, on the subject, and a little bit of time on teaching, right? But actually you tend to be more interested in the subject. You kind of like go and talk in front of the class and hope for the best. And then when this is discovered not to be a great hit, right, after the first lecture or something, and you say something wonderful and the students like put up their hand, is this in the exam? Then cynicism sets in and you think, okay, but actually a great deal can be achieved with scaffolding with the learner in mind. And a great deal of harm can be achieved, if that's achieved is the right word, if assessment practices become deformative. This is something happens a lot at university, rather than formative and transformative. Bad assessment entrenches and even engenders bad habits. And I think that's something that students learn. One of the things, unintended learning outcomes of being at university is bad habits. Not getting up in the morning, binge learning, plagiarizing, etc. Right? So these numbers at the end there, I think I don't have any scientific basis for this, but I'd say that when we're looking at students, we'd say the 10% of your students are going to do well in your course, right? If there's a war breaks out, if you can't teach, they'll do well, right? That 10%. The 10% are going to fail, right? Whatever you do, because they're having a bad time or they're just not cut out for university. But that 80% in the middle, and obviously that's differentiate. Some of them are going to be pass anyway, but that's where you can do the difference. So that's a big number, I think. And we see this with our varying pass rates. So something as silly as when the exam is set, right? The students don't have enough time or it's set too close to another exam. You see carnage, right? Okay, so the students are not learning. If the date of the exam is the determining outcome, they're cramming. Okay, right. So what specifically is going wrong? And I'll be quite brief here. I've lost track of the time, but I suspect I've been talking for a long time. My inner clock is telling me, yeah. So subject proficiency depends on the learner. So it's like the iceberg, right? 1/10 out of the water, but all the other stuff is right at the base for our students, wellness and a sense of connectivity. it's a big issue that the students are not feeling part of the project. They're feeling alienated. Lack of disciplines, right? So those questions I was showing you, if I change one word in the question, the students will answer the old question as it was in the previous exam. You know? So not reading the question, not following instructions, right? So we would think graduates, right? If you said, please go and do X, Y, and Z, would be able to do not A, B, and C, right? Right? If you say write a 2,000 word essay, they won't write you a 10,000 word essay on something else. But that is not the case. That doesn't happen, right? The ability to follow instructions, stuff, is not there. Then we have all the competencies we expect our students to have. Language, computer skills, maths, and then, which is different to language, which is academic reading and writing. And so when we get second years, we expect them to have learned first year economics. But often it's like there was a reset button pushed in the December back. And there's a denial of all knowledge, right? And it's not the fault of my dear colleagues over there, right? It was the same when they did matric. They've forgotten all that stuff. They did matric maths, but they don't know any maths when they come to university. Okay, so what is lacking is a kind of sense of resilience and agency. So we need students who, when they're struggling with maths, come and ask or look up how to do maths. They don't, they just say, I can't do it. When they're reading a text and it gets difficult, what do? Or they try in chapter 5, maybe it's easier. And it's not, it's even more baffling and bamboozling, right? And a sense of a pathway, right? Where you're going, which is different to planning and goal setting. And I think a lot of our students are quite low in that regard, okay? And then subject proficiency is on top of all those things. And if those are lacking, a lot of the students are just going to be bouncing off. And yes, we talk about this. What is the keystone issue? Is it engagement, getting students to engage? And I think it is in a sense, but how to get students to engage? If students are bad at maths, right? They can come to my office and I can teach them how to do basic algebra in half an hour, and they're going to walk out and be able to do is that, their maths isn't that bad that they can't be helped like that, right? But they don't engage. So engagement is the keystone issue. And so what we need is scaffolding, and these are lovely terms from having done, you see, I've been churtled, right? But scaffolding is like in a building. If you take the scaffolding off, the building mustn't collapse. We must do that with our teaching as well. Okay, so, and just some interesting things. These are very random thoughts. I don't think it's linear. We all know the expression, the penny dropping. And the penny has to drop on these points. Realizing you should just write. And you shouldn't be copying and pasting and editing, right? You must trust yourself and write. How do we get that through to students? Realizing that it's interesting, right? Realize that it's about understanding rather than rote learning. Realizing that it's actually, if you've got 3 assumptions and your model is built from 3 assumptions, it's a lot easier to learn that and figure out how to do it than it is to try and learn all the stuff that you derive from that, right? And so on. Realizing that it's easier to get 70% than 50%. It is. You have to struggle to get 50%, because you don't know what you're doing. It's like when you're surfing and you can't surf, it's really hard. When you're surfing and you know how to surf, it's easy. You just get on the wave and surf. So if you're 50%, you're always behind the times, you're catching up. Okay, I know I've been a 50%er myself at times. Yeah. Okay, so those are the points, right, that we need to somehow get students to realize. The penny needs to drop. Okay, so how do we do that? I'll leave out my last bit because I feel I'm going on for too long. Also, I didn't really spend a lot of time on my last section. Yeah. So what specific interventions have we done in ECOS 2? Lots, So we've got 8 mini tests. which have evolved into frequent retrieval practice exercises. So you do a 15-question multiple choice. You have half an hour. There's a long window you can do, but you have half an hour. So you can't look things up, Retrieval. You have to retrieve. They're frequent. There are 8 of them. And practice. You do it more than once, but you don't get the same test. You get similar questions, and you get feedback. So if you engage with the feedback, hopefully you do better, right? You're trying to engender this sense of I must engage with feedback, and the students love that, believe it or not. What they don't like is writing. You can see the multiple choice scores are good. Participation exercises, you get half a mark for the end of the year if you just answer a questionnaire. It's lovely because then I can talk about what you think in class, right? Okay. Lessons for tests, online lessons, which take you through the material and drop heavy hints, which are sadly not regarded, right? Use of early warning systems where students are missing cuts or failing and sending them nice letters, of course, right? But sending them letters and saying, you only got 35%, what's up? You haven't been on Are You Connected for 6 weeks. What are you doing, right? And a nice one that I really love is constituting the class. So at the beginning of the year, you say, what are we doing? Does anyone disagree that we should be on time, right? Does anyone disagree that we're actually here to do economics? Because otherwise you get lots of people who somehow have another idea about what's going on at university. So and I think it's all in good education, right? You set up your outcomes, your assessment criteria, et cetera, but it's very often not done. Okay, right, so just last thing, and then I will stop, because we can talk about the policies when, but the participation exercise, right? As I said, getting ready for the essay. This is what it looks like. They log on, they get this page, ask them if they've done the readings, they've prepped. If they click no, unfortunately what happens is they learn. If they click yes, they go to the next level, right? Okay? But anyway, as I said, that's great, right? The mini test, this is what they look like. They answer the question, they get it wrong, they get a specific explanation of why it's wrong, then they get a general explanation, right? Another one, they got that right. Because they got it partially correct, they get a video, right? So it's not a video specifically, but it's a video on the site. It says, go and look at 17 minutes onwards. Okay, so the great thing about these, right? If you look at what happens, the average if you wrote only one test is 52%, right? The average if you wrote both is 74%. That's a bit of a cheat because you get bonuses, right? So the bonus, you get bonus if you get 70%. Because you're supposed to get 70%, aren't you? You're supposed to aim for 50, okay? But even if we look at average before bonus, you're getting on average a 9% improvement. And they're not writing the same test, most students did better, right? Few did worse, okay? Now with the participation exercise, it's quite interesting though that you've got 329 in the class and sometimes only 195 are checking in, doing something that'll take them 15 minutes, to get half a mark, not on your year mark, on your final mark, right? So that's what we see with attendance as well. So this is what I'm kind of gonna end up with. Despite all our efforts, we've still got 100 students who hardly ever come to lectures, who don't do a 15-minute exercise for half a mark, right? Who haven't been on Are You Connected and who don't even respond if you email them as a lecturer. Only thing they respond to is losing their DP, and then it's too late. Okay, and you can see we had an intervention here at the beginning of the second term. We emailed them all and said, you have to come to lectures now. And it's actually a lie because we can't keep up with attendance with a big class, right? But there's a definite boost there. So whether it keeps up is another matter. Okay, so just that's where I'll leave it. So what, these limits, just quickly, these limits, why? I don't think it's because students are not capable, right? Ultimately, I think it's because we're all so busy that we don't get around to certain things, right? I remember the economics department never getting around to fixing the departmental website, right? Because it's number 10 on everyone's list of priorities, right? And we only get to number 3 ever, right? So we know that, eh? And the way the universities are structured, not grows generally, right? Weird systems with nice and democratic, but also quite, what do they call them? A kind of mixed system, eh? Semi-open. Has its disadvantages when it comes to being agile. But I think, just from my experience, that there are huge potential gains to be made, right? Just in terms of pass rates, without, look, 90% pass rate in ecos, we've had that, but then that, not going to be looking too hard at that person who got 50, eh? Push through. I do think we can do the getting people up to a standard. There's always going to be 10% of people who don't make it. In a normal society, what is a normal society? But we're not a normal society, eh? I think a normal society would be one where there was equality of opportunity, right? We've got opportunity now through access, but not equality of opportunity. Okay, so how do we refocus to make sure that undergraduate, right, is not just a prep for postgrad? And it's not a very good one, is it? If our students, and with due respect to the honors students here, often don't know the undergraduate stuff anyway. Thank you.
Is that right? At the start of the semester, in which David presents his second year course, a ripple goes through faculty that Friar is up. And for the ensuing weeks, and which you will have heard this evening, orthodox is on one side, heterodox is on the other, and the students are in between. And they're required to go out on a limb, albeit with a fairly secure safety harness. They're supposed to think. And I think that's what Friar gave them to do. And this evening, you will have been given a taste of what drives the structure and the nuts and bolts of David's team. I like ripples, and long may the ripples ripple. David, you have joined a list of eminent teachers of faculty and the university who've been recognized the Vice Chancellor's Distinguished Teacher Award. Many congratulations. Please accept this gift as a token of our appreciation for the work that you're doing within the department, in the faculty, and more broadly in the university.